6 weeks after the first alien ship entered Earth's orbit, Supreme Commander Velther stood in what remained of his flagship's command center. The room was dark, except for the emergency lighting. Most of his senior staff was dead or captured. He activated his final transmission to the Kethmoran High Council. "Honored Council," he began, his voice heavy with defeat. "We have failed completely. Not because humans were stronger than us, but because they are fundamentally different from every species we have ever encountered. They do not fight like a military force. They fight like a natural phenomenon, chaotic, creative, and impossible to predict." The transmission continued for several minutes as Velther tried to explain the impossible. How humans had turned their invasion into a collaborative problem-solving exercise. How they had made weapons from toys and military strategy from games. How they had treated the war like entertainment and somehow made that approach devastatingly effective. On Earth, President Lisa Carter stood before the United Nations General Assembly, but she was not addressing only humans. Representatives from 3 other alien species had contacted Earth after monitoring the conflict. They wanted to meet the species that had defeated the Kethmoran Confederation. Next to the president stood Dr. Kate Morrison, the scientist who had first detected the invasion. She now held the newly created position of Director of Interstellar Relations. 6 weeks ago, we faced extinction, President Carter announced to the Assembly. Today, we face a galaxy full of new possibilities. We have proven that cooperation and creativity can overcome any challenge. The aftermath of the war revealed the true scope of humanity's achievement. In just 6 weeks, Earth had not only defeated an invasion planned for centuries, but had also reverse-engineered technology that advanced human science by decades. More importantly, the collaborative networks formed during the crisis had not dissolved after victory. The connections between military and civilian researchers, between students and engineers, between gamers and strategists, had become permanent. Colonel Jake Sullivan, now commanding the newly formed Space Defense Initiative, worked directly with Professor Emma Davis, a theoretical physicist who had become an expert in alien engineering during the war. Together, they were designing humanity's first interstellar vessels. "The alien technology is impressive," Emma explained, showing Jake the holographic blueprints. "But our innovations during the war are even more interesting. We've learned to combine their engineering with our creativity." The ships they were designing looked nothing like traditional human spacecraft or alien vessels. They incorporated organic curves inspired by bird flight patterns, modular systems that could be reconfigured in real time, and control interfaces that looked more like video games than military equipment. The most significant change was cultural. The invasion had proven that humanity's greatest strength was not technology or military power, but their ability to turn any challenge into a collaborative opportunity. Dr. Helen Rodriguez had spent the weeks after the war documenting the innovation networks that had formed during the crisis. Her research showed over 40,000 spontaneous collaboration groups that had contributed to the defense effort. Children's science clubs helped crack alien communication codes, she reported to the International Defense Council. Retirement communities became manufacturing centers. Gaming guilds became tactical coordination teams. Even knitting circles contributed to the war effort by developing new materials. The pattern was clear. When faced with an impossible challenge, humans did not respond by becoming more organized or more disciplined. They responded by becoming more creative and more collaborative. This insight was about to become critically important, because the end of the war was not really an ending. When the Kethmoran delegation arrived to negotiate surrender terms, they brought unexpected news. The Confederation was facing rebellions on dozens of worlds. Other conquered species had heard about Earth's victory and were demanding their own freedom, The alien delegation was led by Velther himself, who had requested to meet personally with the humans who had defeated him. But he was surprised by the team assembled to negotiate with him. The human delegation included Danny Kim, the young gamer who had commanded the counteroffensive. Next to him sat Joe Martinez, the construction foreman who had revolutionized urban warfare. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the MIT researcher, was there along with Kevin Thompson, the teenager who had hacked the alien fleet. Most surprising of all was Linda Murphy, the comedy writer whose broadcasts had demoralized alien forces. She served as the official translator, not because she spoke Cathmoran, but because she understood how to communicate concepts that did not translate directly between species. "We do not understand," Velther said through the translation device. "How can children and civilians negotiate military surrender?" Linda smiled. "Because this was never really a military conflict. You tried to conquer a planet. We turned it into a community project." The negotiations revealed the broader implications of humanity's victory. 3 weeks into what was supposed to be a quick conquest, the Cathmoran Confederation found themselves fighting a war that made no sense against an enemy that should not exist. General Patricia Webb made a decision that would have been impossible in any other military in history. She promoted Sergeant Danny Kim, the 22-year-old gaming specialist, to full operational command of the counteroffensive. "Ma'am, are you sure about this?" asked Colonel Frank Mitchell, a veteran Marine with 30 years of combat experience. "Frank, in 3 weeks, this kid has predicted alien movements better than our best strategic computers," Patricia replied. "His unconventional approach is exactly what we need." Danny stood in front of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, feeling completely out of place in his hastily promoted uniform. But when he looked at the tactical displays, he saw patterns that they experienced. Officers missed. "The alien fleet moves like a raid boss in World of Warcraft," Danny explained, pointing to the holographic display. "They have optimal formations, predictable response patterns, and vulnerability windows. We just need to treat this like a guild coordinating a boss fight." Admiral John Hayes frowned. "Sergeant, this is real warfare, not a video game." "Sir, with respect, that's exactly why we're winning," Danny replied. "They planned for real warfare. They didn't plan for humans who think war is just another problem to solve creatively." Danny's first command decision shocked everyone. Instead of organizing a traditional military counterattack, he sent messages to gaming communities around the world. Within hours, he was coordinating with raid leaders, strategy guides writers, and competitive gamers who understood complex tactical systems. The human counteroffensive began not with traditional military assets, but with what historians would later call the civilian surge. Colonel Frank Mitchell found himself commanding the strangest fleet in naval history. Fishing boats armed with mining explosives sailed alongside luxury yachts equipped with 3D-printed missile systems. Cargo ships carried weapons designed in garage workshops. Even a cruise ship had been converted to a mobile command center. "This is insane," muttered Captain Julie Foster, who was piloting a modified Coast Guard cutter armed with weapons that had been designed by teenagers and built by retired engineers. "Insane is working," replied her gunner, a former video game streamer named Alex Thompson, who had learned advanced targeting techniques from first-person shooter games. The key to the human counterattack was unpredictability. Every ship was different. Every weapon was improvised. Every tactic was invented on the spot. The aliens could not create countermeasures for technologies and strategies that had never existed before. Meanwhile, Dr. Jennifer Walsh was working in the ruins of MIT with the strangest research team ever assembled. Her lead assistant was Alex Thompson's younger brother Kevin, a 17-year-old who had learned electronics from YouTube videos. Her theoretical physicist was Dr. Sandra Lee, who had been teaching high school science 3 weeks earlier. We're not trying to build better weapons, Jennifer explained to her team. We're trying to break their weapons. Kevin held up a small device that looked like it had been built from spare computer parts. This should work. I've been analyzing their communication protocols. They're really sophisticated, but they have the same basic vulnerabilities as any. Networked system. Dr. Lee studied Kevin's device. You're suggesting we hack their entire fleet? Not hack, Kevin replied with a grin. Troll. There's a difference. The firmware virus that Kevin designed was not meant to destroy alien systems. Instead, it was designed to annoy them. Every alien ship that received the virus would have its internal communications filled with Earth's most irritating internet content, spam messages, pop-up advertisements, and automatic subscriptions to thousands of human entertainment channels. But the most effective weapon in humanity's psychological warfare arsenal came from an unexpected source. Linda Murphy, a comedy writer who had become Earth's unofficial war correspondent. Linda's daily Earth status report was broadcast on hijacked alien communication frequencies. She treated the invasion like the setup to an elaborate joke, and her humor apparently translated very poorly into Kethmoran psychology. Day 21 of the alien invasion, Linda announced from a makeshift studio in a Denver basement. The aliens are still confused about why humans keep doing things that make no sense. Today, a group of grandmothers in Wisconsin defeated an alien patrol using knitting needles and tactical cookies. I'm not making this up, though I wish I was, because I could have written better material. The psychological impact on alien forces was devastating. The Kethmoran military had prepared for desperate resistance, heroic last stands, and eventual surrender. They had not prepared for humans who treated the invasion like entertainment. The decisive battle began when Captain Julie Foster led the most chaotic naval assault in human history. Instead of traditional formation attacks, hundreds of small craft attacked from completely random directions. Danny Kim coordinated the assault from his command center, which looked more like a gaming tournament than a military operation. Screens showed individual boats, aircraft, and ground units, each one controlled by volunteers who had learned advanced tactics from simulation games. Remember, we're not trying to win through superior firepower, Danny announced over the general communication channel. We're trying to win through superior confusion. Make them think, and while they're thinking, hit them somewhere else. The strategy worked perfectly. Fishing boats would attack alien destroyers head-on, while cargo planes dropped supplies to ground forces attacking from behind. Civilian aircraft would perform stunts that no military pilot would attempt, drawing alien fire away from actual targets. The aliens tried to respond with traditional tactical analysis, but human forces were not following any pattern that could be analyzed. Every attack was different. Every retreat was also an advance. Every defensive position was simultaneously an offensive based out as the human assault intensified. Dr. Ashley Young, a game theory professor from Stanford, identified the alien fleet's critical mistake. They're trying to retreat to a defensive formation, she announced to the Strategic Command. It's textbook Kethmoran military doctrine. Chapter 7, Defensive Consolidation Under Overwhelming Assault. Danny Kim smiled. Perfect. They're finally playing by rules we can predict. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. As the alien fleet moved into their defensive formation, they followed exactly the pattern that Ashley had identified from captured military manuals. This made them completely predictable for the first time in the entire war. Human forces surrounded the alien fleet using every available craft. Military ships fought alongside fishing boats. Fighter jets flew in formation with civilian aircraft. Even weather balloons had been weaponized and deployed as high-altitude platforms. But the strangest part of the final battle was the coordination system. Instead of traditional military communications, human forces used gaming voice chat servers, social media apps, and even multiplayer game interfaces to coordinate their attacks. Colonel Frank Mitchell found himself taking tactical orders from a 15-year-old girl in South Korea who was coordinating Pacific Ocean naval movements using a modified, real-time strategy game interface. Colonel Mitchell, move your task force to grid reference 7 Alpha 4 and prepare for synchronized assault, came the young voice through his headset. Copy that, Control, Frank replied, not bothering to ask how a teenager had become his tactical commander. Nothing about this war made sense, but it was working. The final assault came from every direction simultaneously. Hundreds of different types of craft, using dozens of different weapon systems, all coordinated by thousands of volunteers who had learned tactical coordination from playing online games together. The alien fleet, designed to defeat organized military resistance, could not cope with the creative chaos of human warfare. Their computers could not process targeting solutions for weapons that had been invented the day before. Their tactical systems could not predict movements coordinated by gaming interfaces. As Kethmorn ships began to surrender across the solar system, Velther sat in his damaged command center, trying to compose his final report to the High Council. We did not lose to superior technology, he began recording. We did not lose to better strategy. We lost to a species that treats warfare like a creative collaboration game. They turned our invasion into their entertainment, and somehow that made them invincible. On Earth, Danny Kim looked at the tactical display showing alien surrender signals across all frequencies. The strangest. War in galactic history was over, and humanity had won by refusing to fight it like a war at all. By day 8 of the invasion, the Kethmoran Confederation was facing something completely outside their experience. The humans were treating the war like a massive puzzle that everyone could help solve. Commander Rachel Stone sat in what used to be a NASA conference room, but now served as the headquarters for impossible logistics. Her team was unlike any military unit in history. Next to her sat Mike Rodriguez, who normally dispatched pizza deliveries in Chicago. Across the table was Lisa Wong, a specialist in package routing for a shipping company. At the far end sat Dr. Alex Turner, who had designed traffic management systems for smart cities. We need to get ammunition to Atlanta, medical supplies to Denver, and communication equipment to Seattle, Rachel announced, looking at the massive map on the wall. The enemy controls most major highways and has destroyed 3 airports. Mike raised his hand. In pizza delivery, we always have backup routes. You map every possible path, then use the fastest one available at any moment. Lisa nodded. Same. With packages, we don't rely on just one delivery method. We use trucks, planes, trains, boats, even bicycles if necessary. Dr. Turner smiled. And in traffic management, we treat every vehicle as part of a larger flow. Individual routes don't matter. What matters is that the system keeps moving. Within 6 hours, they had created supply lines that worked better during active combat than most military logistics systems worked during peacetime. Their secret was treating every delivery like an emergency that required creative solutions. Meanwhile, in Phoenix, Joe Martinez was having the strangest week of his life. Joe was a construction foreman who specialized in building demolition. Now he was teaching urban warfare tactics to Marine Corps officers. See, the thing about taking down a building, Joe explained to Colonel Patricia Webb, is that you don't need big explosives. You just need to hit the right spots at the right time. Patricia looked at the scale model Joe had built of downtown Phoenix. Red markers showed where alien ground forces were likely to advance. You're saying we can trap them? She asked. Better. And that, Joe replied, pointing to specific buildings. We can control exactly where they go. make them think they're finding safe routes, then guide them into kill zones. Joe's techniques were shared with resistance fighters in cities around the world. Within days, urban warfare had evolved beyond anything in military textbooks. Buildings were not just obstacles, they became weapons. The aliens had expected human cities to be defensive positions. Instead, entire neighborhoods became elaborate traps designed by people who built and demolished structures for a living. Dr. Helen Rodriguez was making discoveries that changed how humans thought about warfare itself. Helen was a child psychologist who had become a resistance coordinator by accident. Her job was to keep civilian morale high, but she had noticed something important about human behavior under stress. "We're different," she explained to the International Strategy Committee during a video conference. Every other species the aliens conquered became more predictable when they were scared. Humans become more creative. She had been studying reports from around the world. In London, a group of street artists had developed camouflage techniques that confused alien visual sensors. In Mumbai, children were creating new mathematical codes faster than computers. In Snow Paulo, musicians were composing songs that disrupted alien communication frequencies. "Fear makes other species freeze or run," Helen continued. "Fear makes humans think outside normal patterns." This insight reached Colonel Steve Johnson in Atlanta, where he was implementing the most unusual military strategy in history. His command center looked more like an art studio than a war room. Professor Angela Davis was explaining philosophical concepts to tactical officers. "Paradox confuses logical minds," she said. "If we attack and retreat simultaneously, advance, and defend at the same time, their computers cannot predict our next move." Marcus Williams, the jazz musician, was teaching improvisation to communication specialists. "In jazz, you have a basic structure, but the magic happens when you break the rules creatively." Kevin Lee, the freestyle rapper, was working with encryption, SPECIALISTs, to develop codes based on wordplay and cultural references that changed meaning depending on context. The results were spectacular. Alien forces in Atlanta found themselves responding to human tactics that made no logical sense, but somehow worked perfectly. When they expected humans to retreat, the humans advanced while retreating. When they predicted attacks from the east, humans attacked from all directions, including straight up through storm drains. The technological revolution was happening even faster. Monica Lee's decision to make all defense research open source had created something unprecedented in human history. Dr. Chris Taylor, an ornithologist who studied bird flocking behavior, was working with aerospace engineers to design aircraft that moved like migrating birds. His formations were so chaotic that alien targeting computers could not lock onto individual planes. In Tel Aviv, Dr. Rachel Cohen, a video game designer, was collaborating with physicists in Sweden to create weapons that used gaming physics in real-world applications. Their impossible trajectory systems actually worked because they were based on mathematical models that aliens had never encountered. The breakthrough that changed everything came from Sergeant Danny Kim, a 22-year-old logistics specialist who had been promoted to tactical command because of his expertise in massive multiplayer online games. Danny looked at the alien fleet positions and saw something that his military training had not prepared him to recognize, but his gaming experience had. "They're raid bosses," he announced to General Patricia Webb during a strategy meeting. "What?" the general asked. "The alien formations. They move exactly like raid bosses in online games. Efficient, predictable patterns designed to defeat traditional opponents. But gamers have been finding ways to exploit boss mechanics for decades." Danny pulled up a tactical display that looked remarkably similar to a game interface. "See how they always maintain formation integrity? That's their strength, but it's also their weakness. They can't adapt to chaotic assault patterns. General Webb studied the display. Danny's analysis made sense. The aliens moved like a perfectly programmed computer opponent. Effective against traditional military tactics, but vulnerable to creative exploitation of their own behavioral patterns. What do you recommend? She asked. We stop fighting like a military and start fighting like gamers, Danny replied. Distributed attacks from random vectors, unconventional weapon combinations, and tactics that exploit their programming rather than directly opposing their strengths. The plan that emerged from Danny's insights would have been impossible for any traditional military to implement. It required coordination between thousands of independent units, each using different tactics, all attacking simultaneously from unpredictable directions. But humans had spent the last week learning to coordinate impossible tasks. They had been treating the war like a collaborative puzzle game where everyone could contribute solutions. As Danny's strategy was shared with resistance fighters around the world, something remarkable happened. Pilots, soldiers, and civilian volunteers began to see the alien invasion not as an overwhelming threat, but as the ultimate challenge in a game they were finally learning how to win. On the Kethmoran command ship, Velthur stared at battle reports that made no sense. Human forces were attacking in patterns that violated every principle of military strategy he knew. Yet somehow, these chaotic tactics were working. Supreme Commander, his tactical officer reported, human resistance is not following any recognizable doctrine. They appear to be making up new strategies in real time. That's impossible, Velthur replied. No species can innovate effectively under combat stress. Sir, perhaps humans are not like other species we have encountered. Velthur looked at the tactical display, showing his forces being pushed back on every continent. For the first time in his military career, he began to consider the possibility that the invasion might fail. The invasion began exactly as Velthur had planned. At 0600 hours Earth time, the first wave of Kethmoran ships opened fire on major military targets. Orbital bombardment struck the Pentagon, NORAD, and dozens of other command centers around the world. The aliens expected chaos. They expected Earth's military to collapse without their central command structure. Instead, something impossible happened. Captain Amy Chun stood on the bridge of her flagship when the Pentagon went dark. Her communication officer looked at her with panic in his eyes. Ma'am, we've lost contact with Washington. Amy smiled, switched to Protocol 7. Within seconds, her ship was connected to a new command center. But this center was not in a military base. It was in a high school gymnasium in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Retired Air Force Colonel Ben Turner sat at a folding table surrounded by teenagers with laptops. Next to him was Janet Mills, a logistics coordinator who usually managed supply chains for a grocery store company. On his other side sat Dr. Marcus Johnson, a computer science professor who specialized in distributed networks. Atlantic Fleet, this is Prairie Command, Ben said into his headset. We have you on our screens. What's your status? The aliens had spent centuries mapping human military command structures. They knew how to cut off the head and paralyze the body. But humans had rebuilt their command structure in 4 days, using civilian networks and backup systems the aliens had never observed. In Detroit, Dr. Lisa Park had not slept in 72 hours. She was a mechanical engineer who designed car assembly systems. Now she was designing something entirely different. Her factory floor buzzed with activity. Robots that usually installed car doors were now building small flying drones. Workers who made seat belts were programming guidance systems. The assembly line that produced sedans was now producing defensive weapons. How many can we make in an hour? Asked Tony Rodriguez, her production supervisor. Right now, about 50, Lisa replied, watching the robots work. But we're getting better. By tomorrow, maybe 100. Lisa's factory was not alone. Similar operations were running in 400 locations across North America. Car factories, electronics plants, and even furniture manufacturers were producing military equipment using designs shared over the internet. The Kethmoran ground forces landed expecting to face confused and isolated military units. Instead, they met Major Rick Santos and his team defending Colorado Springs. Rick had been in the Army for 15 years. He knew how to fight, but he had never fought with this kind of support before. His nephew Tommy, just 16 years old, sat in his bedroom 50 miles away, coordinating reconnaissance using a network of hobby drone operators across 3 states. "Uncle Rick, you've got 12 aliens moving toward your position from the east," Tommy said through his earpiece. "My friend Jake in Denver has eyes on them with his racing drone." Rick shook his head in amazement. "Copy that, Tommy. Tell Jake I owe him a pizza." The aliens were completely unprepared for this kind of warfare. Their intelligence had mapped every official military unit on Earth. They had no data on 16-year-old drone pilots or retired engineers running makeshift command centers. Dr. Pavel Volkov in Moscow was having the most important conversation of his career with Dr. Yuki Tanaka in Tokyo. Both were physicists who had never worked together before. Now they were sharing quantum encryption protocols that had been purely theoretical. Just days earlier, the alien communication jamming systems were designed to disrupt traditional military networks. They could not block the ad hoc civilian mesh networks that were running on modified gaming platforms and social media apps. "The encryption is holding," Pavel reported to his new international team. "They cannot break into our communications." In Tokyo, Yuki was coordinating with amateur radio operators across Asia. "We have backup systems on 6 different frequency bands. Even if they disable our primary networks, we can still communicate." The real breakthrough came when Dr. Sarah Williams made first contact with a captured Kethmoran soldier. Sarah was a xenobiologist who studied life forms in extreme environments. She had volunteered to work with prisoners of war. The alien soldier was named Zektar. He was injured and confused. Instead of interrogating him about weapons or military plans, Sarah asked him about his home planet. "What kind of plants grow there?" she asked through a translation device. Zektar was surprised by the question. No other species had ever asked him about his homeworld's ecology. He began to talk about the crystalline forests and methane lakes of his planet. Within hours, Sarah had identified 3 critical vulnerabilities in Kethmoran environmental systems. Her report went directly to Dr. Helen Rodriguez, a child psychologist who had become a resistance coordinator. "They're adapted to low-oxygen environments," Helen explained to her team. "But more importantly, they have no psychological resistance to random events. Their entire culture is based on predictable patterns." This information changed everything. Colonel Steve Johnson, commanding the defense of Atlanta, started deliberately implementing random tactical decisions. His strategy meetings included Professor Angela Davis, who taught philosophy, Marcus Williams, a jazz musician, and surprisingly, Kevin Lee, a freestyle rapper. "I want controlled chaos," Steve told his unusual advisory team. "Give me tactics that make no logical sense, but might work anyway." Marcus suggested they use jazz improvisation principles in their battle planning. Angela recommended philosophical paradoxes to confuse alien strategists. Kevin proposed using freestyle rap techniques to create unpredictable communication codes. The results were remarkable. The aliens, who had conquered 200 worlds using superior planning, found themselves unable to predict human behavior. Every time they thought they understood a human tactic, the humans changed it. Meanwhile, tech entrepreneur Monica Lee had convinced the federal government to do something unprecedented. All defense research was made open source in real time. Scientists, engineers, and programmers around the world could access classified information and contribute improvements. The result was a development pace that the aliens, with their rigid hierarchical research systems, could not match. Software updates to defensive systems were being released every hour, with improvements contributed by millions of volunteers. The turning point came from an unexpected source. 8-year-old Kevin Park was visiting his mother, Dr. Lisa Park, at the converted car factory. While the adults discussed technical specifications, Kevin looked at pictures of alien ships on his mother's computer. "Mom, why do their ships look upside down?" he asked. Lisa stopped talking and looked at the images. Her engineering mind began to process what her son had observed. The alien vessels were designed for zero-gravity combat. Their engine placement and structural design assumed they would always fight in space. "Kevin, you're a genius," Lisa said, kissing her son's forehead. Within an hour, Lisa's observation was shared with every pilot on Earth. The alien ships had a critical weakness in atmospheric flight. They were vulnerable to maneuvers that exploited Earth's gravity. As reports of successful human resistance reached the Kethmoran command ship, Velther began to understand that something had gone very wrong with the invasion. His intelligence officers presented their latest findings. "Supreme Commander, human military communications have become completely incomprehensible. Are they using advanced encryption?" Velther asked. "No, sir. They appear to be using cultural references, jokes, and something called memes as operational security. Our translation computers cannot process the meaning." Velther stared at the tactical display. Red markers showed Kethmoran losses mounting across every continent. The humans were not just resisting, they were learning and adapting faster than any species in recorded history. For the first time in 800 years of planning, Velther began to doubt that the invasion would succeed. The stars were cold and distant when Supreme Commander Velther looked at the tactical display. For over 800 years, his people had watched the small blue planet called Earth. They knew everything about the humans who lived there. They knew their weapons, their cities, their armies. They knew how humans fought each other in endless wars. The Kethmoran Confederation was ready. 12 different alien species served under their command. Each species had been conquered using the same method. First, they watched and learned. Then they struck fast and hard. Finally, they took control. It had worked 200 times before. Velther studied the holographic map of Earth one more time. Red dots marked every human military base. Blue lines showed their communication networks. Green circles highlighted their major cities. Everything was perfect. The invasion would begin in 6 days. On Earth, Dr. Kate Morrison sat alone in her office at 3 in the morning. She was the director of the Global Defense Initiative's Deep Space Monitoring Program. The coffee in her cup had gone cold hours ago. She stared at the strange readings on her computer screen. Something big was moving toward Earth from the outer edge of the solar system. The gravitational sensors showed massive objects in formation. At first, Kate thought the equipment was broken, but the readings were too consistent, too organized. She picked up her secure phone and called Lieutenant Colonel Jake Sullivan. He answered on the second ring, sounding tired and annoyed. "This better be important, Kate," Jake said. "Jake, I need you to look at something." "Can you get to the command center? It's 3 in the morning. I know what time it is. Please just come look at this data." 20 minutes later, Jake stood behind Kate's chair, studying the same readings. His face went pale as he understood what he was seeing. "How many?" he asked quietly. "Thousands," Kate replied. "Maybe more. They're moving in perfect formation toward our solar system." Jake grabbed his phone and started making calls. By dawn, the news had reached the highest levels of government. President Lisa Carter sat in the White House Situation Room, surrounded. by her top advisors. Admiral John Hayes, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, stood at the front of the room with a grim expression. "Madam President, we are facing an unprecedented situation," Admiral Hayes began. "Unknown vessels, numbering in the thousands, are approaching Earth. They will reach our orbit in approximately 6 days." The room fell silent. Secretary of Defense Robert Kim was the first to speak. "Are we certain these are hostile?" "The formation patterns suggest military organization," Hayes replied. "No known human technology could produce vessels of this size." President Carter looked around the room at her advisors. "What are options?" "Limited," Hayes admitted. "We're dealing with technology far beyond our current capabilities." As the meeting continued, something remarkable was happening around the world. Within 12 hours of the first government briefings, world leaders were talking to each other. Old enemies put aside their differences. The United Nations Security Council called an emergency session. Dr. Liu Wei, China's top military strategist, found himself on a secure video call with General Maria Santos from Brazil and Colonel Pierre Dubois from France. They had been enemies in previous conflicts. Now they were planning humanity's defense together. "We cannot fight this like traditional warfare," Dr. Liu said through the translator. "We must think differently." In Russia, President Viktor Petrov was having similar conversations with leaders from India, Japan, and South Korea. The message was the same everywhere. Humanity had to unite or face extinction. The aliens expected panic. They expected humans to blame each other and fight over resources. Instead, something unprecedented happened. For the first time in human history, every major nation agreed to work together. Within 36 hours, the United Nations passed Resolution 2847. Every member nation voted yes. It had never happened before. The resolution created a unified command structure for Earth's defense and authorized the sharing of all military technology and resources. Meanwhile, the Kethmoran fleet continued its approach. Their communication specialists intercepted human, radio, and internet traffic. The translations confused their analysts. Instead of surrender negotiations or desperate pleas for help, they heard strange phrases. Manufacturing protocols activated. Distributed production networks online. Crowdsourced defense solutions. The aliens did not understand what these phrases meant. In their experience, species under threat became predictable. They panicked. They fought among themselves, or they surrendered. Humans were doing none of these things. On Earth, extraordinary things were happening. Dr. Sarah Williams, a biochemist from Stanford University, was working with engineers from Toyota to convert car factories into weapons manufacturing plants. In Germany, video game programmers were helping military planners design new communication systems. The strangest development was happening in schools and universities. Students were not being evacuated. Instead, they were being organized into research teams. High school science classes were analyzing alien technology from old science fiction movies. College engineering students were designing new weapon systems. Captain Amy Chun, commander of the Atlantic Fleet, spent her days coordinating with people she had never met before. Her new team included a logistics expert from Amazon, a traffic control specialist from New York City, and a retired Air Force colonel who now taught high school mathematics in Iowa. "This is insane," her second-in-command, Commander Dan Foster, said during one planning session. "Maybe," Amy replied, looking at the dozens of video screens showing volunteers from around the world. "But it's our kind of insane." As the alien fleet entered the outer solar system, Velther reviewed the final intelligence reports. Everything looked normal. Earth's military forces were in their usual positions. Their communication networks were functioning. Their leaders were meeting in their typical locations, but something felt wrong. In 800 years of observation, the Kefmoran had never seen humans cooperate like this. Every previous crisis had divided them. His crisis was uniting them. "Begin final preparations," Velther ordered his staff. "The invasion starts tomorrow." He did not know that humanity's real preparations were just beginning.